There we go. Wonderful. Well, thank you all for being here, and especially a thank you to Sarah Augustine. And I'll just give a brief intro of who Sarah is, and then we will, as we've been doing, stop promptly at 10. So I want to give Sarah plenty of time to share with us this morning. And I should note, this is kind of part of our ongoing series of learning more about the doctrine of discovery and about our land and Indigenous rights. And we started this with John Ruth a few weeks ago. And so this is our continuing of our learning, hopefully moving into action. So Sarah Augustine, who is a Pueblo Tewa descendant, is founder and co-chair of the Dismantling the Doctrine of Discovery Coalition. And she is the executive director of a dispute resolution center in Central Washington State. She's also the co-founder of the Suriname Indigenous Health Fund, where she has advocated for vulnerable Indigenous peoples since 2004. She's represented the interest of Indigenous community partners to their own governments, the Inter-American Development Bank, the United Nations, the Organization of American States, Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, the World Health Organization, and a host of other international actors, including corporate interest. She's also a columnist for the Anabaptist World. So if you get Anabaptist World, you can look for her columns. She's the co-host of the Doctrine of Discovery podcast with Sherry Hostetler. In Washington State, where she lives, she serves on a leadership role on multiple boards and commissions to enable vulnerable peoples to speak for themselves in advocating for structural change. She and her husband, Dan Peplow, and their son live in Yakima Valley of Washington. And she is the author of this book right here, The Land is Not Empty, Following Jesus and Dismantling the Doctrine of Discovery, which I highly recommend, and Roger has requested in our Boise Public Library, so you can check it out or buy it from Herald Press. And on a personal note, I got to know Sarah some, as she's a part of Seattle Mennonite as well. And so I had the honor and privilege of our paths overlapping some in my time in Seattle. So grateful to have you here, Sarah, and I will hand it on over to you. Thanks.
Great, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for welcoming me. And I want to just give you a few ideas, share a few ideas with you, and then I hope we can engage in some conversation if you would like. So the doctrine of discovery, it sounds like you've already started talking about it. And so you guys have a general sense of what that's all about. So I'm going to give you a definition from my point of view. It's a legal and philosophical framework dating to the 15th century that gave Christian governments moral and legal rights to invade and seize Indigenous lands and to dominate Indigenous peoples. So the doctrine of discovery, many people don't know, is a legal doctrine in the United States. So it is the law, and it is the law that governs how we think about land rights and succession, who has the right to own land. So the patterns of oppression that continue to dispossess Indigenous peoples of their lands today are found in numerous historical documents, such as papal bulls and royal charters, but also in US Supreme Court rulings as recently in 2005. So many people don't know that the most recent ruling by the Supreme Court was in 2005, and the majority opinion was written by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So while she is sort of held up as a champion of progressive causes, she is the majority author, writing why the doctrine of discovery is the basis of settled law for denying Indigenous peoples land rights. So collectively, these and other concepts form a paradigm of domination that legitimates extractive industries that displace and destroy many Indigenous peoples and other vulnerable communities and harm the earth. So the doctrine of discovery is a legal structure. It is not, while it happened historically, it is ongoing. It is not some old thing that happened a long time ago. It is the structure of the legal system for Indigenous peoples today in the United States and around the world. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is our coalition, the Coalition to Dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery. Who are we and where are we coming from? So this is a national coalition. We also have relations to the north with Canada. And so we hope it will soon be an international coalition with Canadian Mennonites as well. But this is a national coalition of volunteers. We have one part-time staff who's an organizer, but largely we organize ourselves in committees to engage in dismantling the doctrine of discovery. And so I'm going to start with just sort of telling you a vision of the world that I have learned from my elders. So what have I learned about the nature of reality and how does it relate to this work? So what I've learned is that we live in a closed system of mutual dependence. So what is a closed system? A system is one where, a closed system is one where you can't add new things, and those pieces also can't be ejected. So for example, there is no new air that we can import into the world. We can't import new water. We can't import new soil. We are living in a closed system. And within that system, we are mutually dependent on each other. So human beings are mutually dependent, but so are other kinds of life. We are all mutually dependent upon each other for survival, to survive and to thrive. So this is the worldview of reality, my understanding of reality that I've learned from elders. And what I've learned from the dominant culture in the United States is quite opposite from that. The dominant culture says that progress is linear in time and it is evidenced by accumulation. So progress or success, you know, if you've achieved it because of accumulation. So in this view of reality, the earth is a set of raw resources, and to extract those raw resources is in service to progress. And so how do we know if we've been successful? We accumulate wealth and power and security. So this is the vision of reality in the dominant culture, which is quite different from a vision of reality that I have learned from my elders. So within this worldview of the dominant culture, extraction is rooted in the concept of dominion or domination, and it is justified in the concept of perpetual growth. So in our economic system of capitalism, in order for us to thrive in that economy, it's dependent on perpetual growth, this notion of perpetual growth. And so extraction and domination is justified in the concept of perpetual growth, although extraction threatens every system of life on the earth through the pollution of air and water and soil. So one example I'll give you is that we're in relationship now with Kakushtal, which is a Mayan community that lives in the Yucatan Peninsula. That's their traditional homeland. And their vision of water is a living, sentient being with spirit. It is not a commodity to be extracted. It's not even a commodity to be protected. It is a living entity in relationship with people. It's very different from this idea that water is a commodity. So often when we hear about technological solutions that would address climate change, for example, many of us recognize that climate change is a threat to our survival. Often what the dominant culture offers are technological solutions so that we can invent our way out of the challenges that we're in. But technological solutions alone will not heal creation or end climate change or dismantle oppressive systems, because the oppressive systems we have are built on an underlying logic that is rooted in perpetual growth. So if you try to, if you say we're going to be carbon neutral, and we are going to have solar power and wind or hydropower, the technologies created for hydropower or solar power will still depend on extraction and the logic of extraction. So instead of extracting coal and oil, we will be extracting silica and rare earth, these things that will also damage our ability to live within the closed system that within which we're mutually dependent. So the amount of silica, the amount of rare earth that would be required to fuel our current energy needs will also threaten the ecological systems upon which we depend. So accumulation and perpetual growth are still the desired outcomes when we're trying to invent our way out of the conundrum that we're in. So in the vision of the dominant culture, competition is also required to get one's needs met. And so this competition leads to stratification, which is sort of the class system that we think about. And it also leads to violent hierarchies and oppression. So this is where our systems of white supremacy come from, and our system of patriarchy are rooted in this sort of hierarchical beliefs that justify why the wealthy and powerful, why they deserve what they have, and why the people who are excluded are not worthy. So dismantling the doctrine of discovery means dismantling the land tenure system of the United States and around the world, because those people who are empowered to own land and to improve land, the current legal system justifies their ownership of those things, and dismantling that system will challenge those ideas with the concept of inclusion. So dismantling the doctrine of discovery coalition, I want to just say we're grounded in the mandate of Jesus that Jesus claims in the book of Luke, which is a mandate of right relationship and repair. So Jesus proclaims, the Spirit of God is upon me to proclaim good news to the poor. And what is the good news that he is proclaiming? He's talking about freedom for prisoners, sight for the blind, and freedom for the oppressed. And Jubilee, he cites Jubilee, which is a just reorganization of human systems. And as Anabaptists, we affirm shalom that is evidenced in creation and God's call to live in shalom or right relationship with creation and with each other. So we affirm in the coalition decolonization as a concrete way of expressing solidarity with Indigenous peoples and to resist the colonial norms of perpetual growth, accumulation, and extractive logic. So decolonization is climate justice, and climate justice is decolonization. We cannot have climate justice without decolonization, because the legal system that we have now supports extraction on every level. And so it's impossible to get out of the climate conundrum we're in without actually engaging in decolonization. So in the coalition, we believe our Anabaptist faith calls us to be witnesses of peace, and our commitment to simple living provides concrete actions for resisting the norms of perpetual growth, accumulation, and extractive logic. So I don't know if I've shared with you, those of you who've read my book know that I'm actually a convert. I wasn't raised in the Anabaptist faith. And for me, my understanding of simple living as a Mennonite is an expression of the peace witness, that it is very much a concrete expression of the peace witness. And that is a way that I can demonstrate my commitment to discipleship in my life, my family's life, and in the life of our community. So I want to say decolonization is not a symbolic act. It's not a metaphor. So decolonization means relinquishing control of a subjugated people. It means to identify, challenge, and revise or replace assumptions, ideas, and values and practices that reflect a colonizer's dominating influence. So for the coalition, this means we affirm the sovereignty of Indigenous peoples, and affirming sovereignty includes struggling with Indigenous peoples for their sovereignty. So as Indigenous peoples are struggling for sovereignty, we are going to accompany them in that work. And we have two primary campaigns right now. One is, as I mentioned, in the Yucatan Peninsula with Kakushtal, this group, this Mayan community that is struggling for land rights, as Monsanto and other GMOs are engaged in large agro business that is polluting the aquifer. And we've collaborated with Mennonites in North America and Europe. And it so happens that the people that are engaging in these large agricultural projects are Mennonite colonists. So there are Mennonite colonies there that are actually breaking the law in Mexico and engaging in large agro projects. So we are actually very gently working on reaching out to those colonies, and at the same time struggling with Kakushtal to challenge the legal system in Mexico. The other large campaign we're running now is at Oak Flat, where the US government, this is in Arizona, the territory now known as Arizona, where the government of the United States has concessed land, traditional spiritual land, ceremonial land of the Apache people to Rio Tinto for the purpose of copper mining. And so we are working together for multiple years with both of these groups with these Indigenous peoples to support their claim of sovereignty. We also advocate in the coalition for land return. So returning traditional lands to Indigenous peoples and challenging the notion of private property is a focus of our work. And we have worked with a variety of contexts, helping to return lands to Indigenous people, because Jubilee requires a complete reorientation to property, which we affirm. And so this doesn't mean each of us individually moving out of our house and like that, but more challenging the Department of the Interior, the federal land of state parks, thinking about how we can return land to Indigenous peoples in ways small and large, because land also is the access to sovereignty. Okay, so Christianity has operated historically in a mode of spiritual superiority that is strengthened and even acted as the basis as systems of oppression, and active decolonization includes decolonizing Christianity. That's another focus of our work. I'll just quickly go on so that I can hear from you too. We have a two-tiered approach of active decolonization. So we partner and co-create relationships with First Peoples, and we stand together because our survival is interdependent. That's one thing we do. We collaborate with Indigenous peoples struggling for their survival, and we say our survival depends on your survival. We will struggle with you. And we also, the other prong in that approach is that we take responsibility for the systems built by our society that benefit us, and our responsibility to dismantle. And we don't need Indigenous people to lead that work. We recognize that anybody can do that work of challenging and dismantling oppression. Just like slavery had to be dismantled, these systems also have to be dismantled. The final idea I'll share with you is that we acknowledge that Indigenous peoples form complex, diverse communities with varied interests. And we choose to join with and support the brilliance of Indigenous individuals and communities seeking self-determination, decolonization, and the dismantling of the oppressive systems, including the doctrine of discovery. So that is how we orient ourselves in relationship to Indigenous peoples. So I'm going to stop there and ask if that was quite a lot. Are there questions I can answer, or is there conversation you'd like to have?
Russ Bushard here. Can you hear me?
Yes, hi.
Um, I have a Canadian background, and it seems to me that the Canadian government has led the way of returning a lot of Indigenous land to their own control. Is that sort of the case? Chief?
So, it's interesting. I'm working on a lecture series at Simon Fraser University together with Simon Fraser. And Canada has certainly done a lot of work. And there's still a lot to do. The law that is the basis of federal policy in Canada, it still requires some work. And so, so I would say from an American point of view, it feels like Canada is leaps and bounds ahead of the United States. And then what I'm hearing from partners in Canada is that, oh, we still have a long way to go.
Sarah, Larry Howder here. Really enjoyed your book. Both Rebecca, my wife, and I read it. We did not enhance your purchase opportunity because we borrowed the book from Weldon Nicely, a co-friend of ours. One of the chapters that I enjoyed, well, not enjoyed, but was so eye-opening for me was your cosmology, your understanding of cosmology and how it interplays with our theology. And I think that just for me, it lies at the core of what you're talking about, that we have to reimagine the created order. And you put all of the same plane where I think European missionaries put humanity at the apex of that. And you sort of rearrange that cosmology to make it more of an equal playing or an equal importance. And I wondered if you could speak a little bit about that particular part. At one point in here, you talk about Walter Sawatsky. I don't know what page it was on, but you said Walter Sawatsky makes the claim that when he argues that God's mission is to save 3 billion non-Christians, I advocate for a larger vision of mission, one which includes the restoration of the whole creation.
Yeah, and so, so that cosmology is just, it's an understanding of reality through a spiritual lens. And so this cosmology really comes to me from Indigenous spirituality. I've learned from elders, from my own people, and then many Indigenous peoples in the world, that is really rooted in this practice of reverence. So understanding that I am one being that is in a family of things, and understanding where I am within that what I do matters, and it has an impact on every other being. And so that understanding of the importance of my actions, and also that I am not the most important thing, both holding both of those things at the same time. And, the cosmology that I understand is really also thinking about, how do we know what God's will is, or how do we know what God's nature is? And you can see it in the created world. And so a really important part of Indigenous spirituality for me is, my son and I pray at dawn every day. That's in keeping with the tradition of my people from the time immemorial, praying at dawn and acknowledging the faithfulness of the Creator in raising the sun once again. So of course I understand the core principles of astronomy and how our planet works together, with the sun and so on. But it's still a practice of reverence to acknowledge the faithfulness that is built into the things that we depend on for life. So we pray and offer cornmeal in the morning at dawn, but also with the rain. We depend on rain. You can see a little bit behind me. It's kind of not a clear picture, but we have 200 acres here. We raise cattle, and we're absolutely dependent on rainfall. And we're giving thanks for that, because we acknowledge that we are dependent on these systems, and that we see the faithfulness of the Creator evidenced in these ways, with the sunrise, with the rainfall. And that is a constant reminder of humility, to acknowledge that, hey, I can't make it rain. And as our aquifer is more and more polluted with the impacts of large ag, we really depend on that rainfall, because the water, the irrigation water is pretty polluted. So we don't irrigate at all on our place. I could go into that. It's a whole different thing. I think this cosmology is a different vision of reality. It is a vision of reality different from the vision of reality in the dominant culture, which is really comprised in one's lifetime. That is all reality is. And the indigenous worldview, or from my point of view, the one that I subscribe to, is an understanding that that I am a product of the ones that came before me, and that what I'm doing now on the earth is setting the context for the ones that come after me. And I have an obligation to live rightly based on that connection between generations. And also, I'm not the center of the world, both of those things at the same time. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I guess in closing, I'll just state one more thing that I think is probably on the same topic, which is raising up the transversal worldview that acknowledges the interdependence, that each of us is, that we each are interdependent, but also that we crave to be connected, because we are made and created to be connected to each other and to all of creation. So we acknowledge in the coalition that our attempts to seek right relationship with Indigenous peoples, to balance power, within that work, we will make mistakes, and we seek conciliation with Indigenous peoples, understanding that it is impossible to reconcile where a true relationship has yet to be established. And so our orientation is one of seeking repair. And we affirm the transversal worldview that acknowledges that you are all my relations, that I am your relation, that we are interdependent. And we also affirm that the good news is reciprocal, where Indigenous spirituality offers hope to humanity, that we must seek and accept to be whole. That the good news does not go one way. It's not comprised in one mode of thinking, but also includes the wisdom and understanding of Indigenous spirituality.
Thank you, Sarah. I so appreciated your really clearly naming of climate justice is also about decolonization. And I think we can so easily get in these, like, we're doing this and we're doing that, but forget how they're all interconnected. So I really appreciate your clear naming of that. And especially, I think this church is one that does a lot around climate justice and cares a lot about that. And so I think it's beautiful to be thinking of these together. Any last lingering questions before we thank Sarah? There's so much rich to ponder and continue to learn. All right, well, we'll let you all come to church now. Thank you, Sarah, so much for being with us. This was such a gift, and I really encourage everyone to go get her book, borrow it from me, check it out from the library, or go buy it, because authors need money too. So, so grateful to have you with us and for all of your work with the coalition. You have a wonderful
Thanks so much.
day.
It's a pleasure to be here. Great to be with you. And I look forward to a time when we can see each other face to face.
Indeed. All right. Bye, everyone. And we are going to close this meeting and start a new one for worship if you're staying at home. Thanks for being here.